Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dig into the fascinating history of money, all to figure out why something like Bitcoin was even invented in the first place.
But before we dive in, let's start with a really fundamental question that's going to guide us through this whole story. What actually makes money? Good money. What qualities does something need to have to be durable, divisible, portable, and most importantly, trustworthy?
All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to follow a story of problems and solutions, stretching from the very earliest days of trade right up to our digital world. Way back in the beginning, right? There was no such thing as money. There was just stuff. So if you had a cow and you needed a house, you first had to find someone with a house who also just happened to be looking for a cow. I mean, what are the odds? Economists call this the double coincidence of wants, and it's a massive roadblock for any society trying to grow. So this direct trade, this barter system, it was just incredibly inefficient. The so-called money in your transaction, your grain, your cow, could literally rot or get lost. It was a huge pain to carry around, and you couldn't exactly chop off a cow's leg to pay for a new window, right? This didn't just make single trades a hassle, it basically put a hard limit on how complex and prosperous a society could ever get. So pretty quickly, people started looking around for a better way to do things, a better medium of exchange. They needed something that could solve all these problems, and this is the key part, something that could actually store the value of their hard work over time. And this kicked off a sort of natural evolution, a worldwide contest to find the best possible form of money. Societies tried all kinds of things, from unique stones to seashells. But eventually, humanity pretty much all converged on the one thing that ticked all the boxes: gold. And this brings us to a really crucial idea called hard money. Now, that doesn't mean it's physically tough. It means it's hard to create more of it. And gold was the ultimate hard money. Why? Because you couldn't just wish it into existence. You had to pour enormous amounts of energy and resources into digging it out of the ground. What's so amazing is the contrast this shows us. On one side, you have hard money, like gold. Its value is pretty stable because the amount of new gold mined each year is just a tiny drop in the bucket compared to all the gold that already exists. On the other hand, you have easy money, like seashells. It always fails because sooner or later, someone just figures out a way to get a ton of it, flooding the market and making it worthless. Okay, so gold is great, but let's be real. Lugging gold bars around is still pretty heavy and risky. So governments and banks came up with a new, brilliantly convenient solution: paper notes. And you know what? At first, this system worked like a charm. People totally trusted the paper because they believed it was just a handy placeholder, basically a claim check for the real gold sitting safely in a vault somewhere. But this whole setup had a single, massive point of failure. You had to trust a central authority to keep its promise. And as we're about to see, that trust was about to be completely shattered. Then World War I hits in 1914, and governments suddenly need unbelievable amounts of money for the war. They had a choice. They could raise taxes on everyone, which is always unpopular, or they could just print more paper money. Well, they chose the easy path. And just like that, the promise was broken. Money was no longer hard, and the value of every single note in people's savings began to slowly but surely bleed away. And this story perfectly illustrates what happens when hard money suddenly becomes easy money. In West Africa, glass beads were once hard money because they were really difficult to make locally. Then European traders showed up. For them, making glass beads back home was super easy, so they just mass-produced tons of cheap beads, sailed over, and traded them for truly valuable things like ivory and gold. For the locals, it was an economic disaster. Generations of wealth, all stored in those beads, just evaporated into nothing. This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? It gets to the core injustice of this new system. You and I, we have to work hard to trade our time and energy to earn money, but governments could now just create it out of thin air. This whole process is basically a silent tax, a hidden transfer of wealth from people who work and save to the people who control the money supply. So this long history of broken promises, of money losing its value, it created this huge problem that was just sitting there, waiting for a solution. And then, in 2008, right in the middle of a global financial crisis, an anonymous creator named Satoshi Nakamoto proposed a completely radical new idea. The idea was to create a new kind of money that had all the best properties of gold: scarcity, durability, divisibility, but was built for the internet age. It would be a system that couldn't be controlled, manipulated, or inflated away by any single person or government. So this is the absolute crucial point. This number. Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a rule into the Bitcoin code. There can only ever be a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin created. Ever. It's a fixed, predictable, and totally finite supply. For the very first time, we had something that was verifiably scarce in the digital world.
And this shows the fundamental shift, right? On the left, we've got the old system, where you have to trust politicians who can always be pressured to just print more money. On the right, you have Bitcoin, a system that's governed by transparent code that anyone can check. The trust has moved away from fallible people and put into verifiable math. Because of these properties, especially that program scarcity and the fact that it's difficult to produce, it wasn't long before people started calling Bitcoin digital gold. It was a return to the principles of hard money, just reinvented for a world that lives online. So, after this whole incredible journey from bartering cows all the way to verifying digital code, what's the big takeaway from all of this? You know, it all really boils down to the rules of the game. Whether it's gold, paper, or code, money only works when the rules are fair, transparent, and can't just be changed by a few powerful people for their own benefit. Because the moment those rules are broken, the value of everyone's savings just gets silently wiped out. Well, the creation of Bitcoin suggests that at least one person or group of people thought the answer to that question was a definite yes. So now, the real question is for all of us. What do we do with that idea? Thanks for watching.